Hi guys, this is day 40 of the AS Economics Revision Challenge, and today we are doing supply side policies which are used to both sometimes control inflation and also use as a way to make the current account deficit go down in the long run. Supply side policies are those policies which are designed by the government in order to increase productivity and make the AS curve of the economy to go to the right. And supply side policy increases the long run productivity of the economy and can also result in an economy to have a higher international competitiveness through lower costs. And so the whole goal of supply side policy is to make sure that the productivity goes up and a country can gain some kind of a competitive advantage, which can result in a country to export more in the future, and that in turn can result in ultimately to improve the current account of the balance of payment. So when we look at our diagram for supply side policies, we're going to make our ADAS framework. So AD curve is downward sloping, AS curve is upper sloping, and we have, let's say, equilibrium price level of P naught and GDP of phi naught, and let's say aggregate supply curve shifts to the right because of supply side policies. What you can see from this is two things. Number one, when your successful supply side policies happen, the aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, causing number one, the price level of the economy to go down, number two, the GDP to go up, and number three important thing that we can understand from this one is this, that because the price level is going down, we are hoping that exports become cheaper, imports become expensive, and therefore your X minus M can go up as well because we are gaining competitiveness. So how do we achieve that? So supply side policies, let's discuss all the different kinds of supply side sort of initiatives that the economy can do in order to make the aggregate supply curve shift to the right. The first supply side policy we would like to discuss is what we call privatization. In privatization, what happens is this, that the government tries to sell the state-owned assets to the private sector, and the main motivation is that the private sector has for profit motive. Private sector would want to sort of make things more efficient, try to look at increasing profitability of businesses, and this results in basically cost to go down, this results in prices to become better, this results in basically the functioning of the industry to improve, because now the government is not owning it but the private sector is owning it. Second important sort of supply side policy is what we call deregulation. In deregulation, we are trying to reduce the barriers of entry, trying to have more competition in the market, trying to make sure that there is more firms in the market, and that results in competition to increase and therefore improvement in the businesses as well. Kind of like breaking monopoly power so that inefficient monopolies are replaced by many firms who are trying to compete on prices and are not doing what we call practices that are killing competition in the market. The third policy we end up doing is what we call reducing taxes and reducing state welfare benefits. Well, why is reducing taxes important? When you reduce taxes, especially direct taxes, it results in basically more profitability for businesses. Also, it results in people to work harder because the incentive to work has gone up because people know that their extra investment or extra hard work will lead to more pay, but the taxes will not go up. Similarly, state welfare benefits are sometimes a problem because they can result in people to not work, and therefore that's another way to encourage supply side in the economy. The fourth reason why the fourth sort of policy where supply side policy is useful is what we call increased tax education and training. Now this is a long-term initiative, but when you have more educated labor force and more trained labor force, that results in higher productivity, and that can also results in aggregate supply of an economy to go up and economic growth to happen. In fact, one of the most important sort of distinction between developing and developed countries is the idea that more education and training is found in the developed countries, resulting in higher productivity. Lastly, we could also look at improving transportation and infrastructure of a country. In a free market, there is very low likelihood to have public transport to be provided, because again it's what we call a public good, which is basically non-viable, non-excludable. So if the government tries to make sure that there is increased sort of infrastructure and transportation, it can help businesses in terms of lowering costs, and it can help basically improving the society's productivity as well now with better transport structures and better infrastructure. So what are the advantages of supply side policy? Well, the first big advantage of supply side policy is the fact that supply side policies can help reduce inflation in the long run, because it can result in aggregate supply curve to shift to the right, and therefore efficiency and productivity gains causes cost of production to fall, and therefore lower cost push inflation will happen in the market. So the first big advantage is that it reduces inflation in the long run. Second big advantage is that it helps us in creating more jobs and sustainable growth through the positive effect on labor productivity and competitiveness. So one is that your economic growth happened through AD going up, but that is basically not long term, because when the demand falls, AD falls, your GDP may fall. But in this case, it's a long-term sustainable improvement, because when the productivity go up, there is a possibility it may continue for many years. So increasing competitiveness will also help improve the balance of payment of an economy. The third big advantage when we look at supply side policy is that there is less of a conflict in supply side policy as compared to demand side policy. I'm going to go back to the diagram here before I move on. Look at this, guys. In this kind of a diagram, when the AS curve shifts to the right, not only price level goes down, basically lower inflation, but GDP goes up, but at the same time X minus M also improves. So this supply side policy can meet us all our goals. First is lower inflation. Second is economic growth. Third is improvement in X minus M or net exports. And the fourth one is lower unemployment, which also basically increases, because when the GDP goes up, unemployment goes down. So if you go back to this, there is basically creation of real jobs and sustainable growth, which means both unemployment will fall, GDP will rise, price level will fall, and even X minus M will improve. So all the four policy goals are met, and that's why this is probably one policy which is very popular irrespective of whatever school of thought in economics is out there. In terms of disadvantages, supply side policy has some disadvantages as well. Number one, supply side policies can take a long time to work its way through the economy, which means there are time lags that happen. Why? Because the kind of policy we're trying to do is basically improvement in the quality of, for example, your human capital, its education and training. All of this will not result in quick results. So all of this will not fix the economy quickly. It may take much longer, and sometimes that becomes a big problem, because when government is trying to sort of do this, people will probably be impatient and they say there's no result happening. Why is the government not doing anything? So that's why sometimes politicians do not want to only rely on supply side policies, because it is very long term rather than short term. Second thing that happens in supply side policy is it's very costly to implement, and the costly aspect of it to be implemented is a big problem, because when you look at it from the perspective of education and training, all of this requires a lot of funds from the government, and the government may need to then again to raise these kind of funds, may need to tax more probably, or cut down expenditure elsewhere, which means there could be an opportunity cost issue or other issues, or maybe even rely on borrowing from somewhere to pay for these expensive policies. The last issue is about equity. Many supply side policies measures have a negative effect on the distribution of income, at least in the short term. When you look at lowering taxes, when you look at reducing union power, when you look at privatization, all these policies can affect both the rich and the poor, especially the poor, because the poor might not like the fact that state welfare benefits are going down, or government expenditure or taxation are going down. Lowering taxes is basically those policies which affect the rich more, so they will benefit much more. So there could also be a problem in terms of creating inequality in the society.